Hi grade ones, today we are going to talk about a new math unit called measurement. And you might have been practicing some measurement at home with your stuffies or with any items that you might have in your house, where maybe you have stepped on the scale and measured your weight, or maybe you've lined up against a wall and you've measured how tall you are. So I'm going to talk to you about some measurement words that we're going to be learning in this unit. The first word I want to explain to you is called length. And when we measure length, we measure how long something is. So you could lay down a skipping rope and you could measure how long your skipping rope is, or you could measure how many steps it takes to get from your couch to the washroom. When we measure length, we try to measure how long something is. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about. The next thing we're going to talk about is called height. And when we measure height, we measure how tall something is. So if you've ever made a tower or a Lego castle, or if you've stacked blocks up on top, you can measure how high you can build a tower. I remember back to our building unit when we had to build towers, we had to measure and try and figure out how high we could build that tower. So that's when we measure height. Weight is when we measure how heavy something is. And in school, we would use something called a pan balance scale, but you might not have one of those at home. So you could measure your weight, you could even just measure it in your hands, putting two objects in your hands and trying to figure out which item is heavier. Or you could step on a bathroom scale and see how heavy or how many pounds you might weigh, or kilograms. So weight is another measurement term that we're going to talk about. And when we measure weight, we try to compare different things. And even when we measure length or height, we try and compare what is taller, what is shorter, what is longer, what is heavier, and those are all terms that we're going to be using in our measurement unit. Now, one neat little idea for you is you could make a little book. Now this book that I have, it's a printable book, but you could make your own book just out of paper. And you could put a bunch of little pieces of paper together and staple them together, and then try and think of as many different things in your house that you could measure. So for example, this page says a thermometer measures, what does a thermometer measure? Temperature. So I know that in the last few weeks, I have been looking at the thermometer every single day because the weather has been beautiful and spring-like. So every day I get up and I think, oh, what's the weather going to be like today? What's the temperature? So that's one thing you might measure. The next page says, a ruler measures length, and this pencil is 7 centimeters long. Now in grade 1, we don't really talk about centimeters or meters. We might just talk about it, but we're not actually going to be measuring with centimeters or meters. So we're going to be using something called reference, which means items like your hand or your shoe or a block. So those are going to be our measurement tools, but it's still okay to learn a little bit about centimeters and meters and how to use a ruler. The next page says, a pan balance will tell if something is heavy or light. And those are going to be two words that we're going to be using to compare weight. Is it heavier or is it lighter? The next page says, a scale measures weight. And you might have one of these scales in your house. You might even have a food scale, because sometimes people measure their food. So try and look around your house and see if you have a scale somewhere in your house. The next one says, I would like to measure my desk. I will use a ruler. You can think about things in your house that you might like to measure. Maybe you're going to measure how high your teddy bear is. And what might you use to measure that teddy bear? Or maybe you're going to try and measure your kitchen table. What would you use that you could measure your kitchen table with? Maybe you'll use your shoe. Maybe you will have your little brothers and sisters line up and lay along the floor and try to measure with bodies. So think about some neat things in your house. It doesn't have to be a ruler. It can be a toy, it can be an item that is the same length that you could measure with. And we're going to be demonstrating what that looks like and how to measure. And then this last little page just has some of those measuring tools. It says a pan balance is what we use to measure weight, a thermometer is what we use to measure temperature, and a ruler is what we use to measure length. And so I want you to try and go around your house and think of as many different things that you could use to measure. Or different items that you could use to measure length, height, temperature, and weight. And in the next few videos, we're going to teach you how to measure those things. So right now, your challenge is to go and look for things in your house to measure, okay? Thanks for checking in.